Here in Saratoga?
Could be
Yeah,
road.
Okay, we'll have to, if we don't have them.
What I was thinking was, I'm not sure that his phone number is listed under him or whether it's listed under Jane.
584-1966.
Pardon?
584-1966.
Okay,
Okay, we're rolling.
all right. This is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 2nd of September, 2004, approximately 1:45 p.m. Would you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Name is William F. for Francis Shaw. Place of birth, you said?
Place of birth and date of birth, please.
Date of birth, December 2nd, 1929, in Schenectady, New York.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
High school graduate, Mount Pleasant High School, 1948.
Okay. All right. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
No, I tried to enlist in 1948 and failed the physical. And then in 1951, I was drafted.
Okay. What branch of service were you drafted?
The Army Corps of Engineers.
All right. Where did you go for your basic training?
Fort Devens, Massachusetts, with the 593rd Engineer Construction Company.
All right. What kind of basic training did you receive at Fort Devens, and did you receive any additional training as an engineer, and what was it?
Yes, of course we went through the general basic training that everybody goes through, the combat training, plus the construction training, and then I was sent to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, for training as a construction draftsman, and that was in the summer of '51.
How long was that school?
13 weeks.
Now, what were some of the things you learned there?
Basic drafting, construction, how a building goes together, really.
Did you take drafting in high school or?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Where did you go for any additional training anywhere else?
No, that was it.
Okay. When was your unit? Were you sent as a unit to Korea?
No, I had transferred out of the 593rd quite a bit before I went overseas and was stationed at South Boston Army Base, and from there I went overseas and was assigned to the unit that I was in Korea.
Okay, so you were assigned as a replacement?
I was assigned as a replacement, that's right.
Okay, how did you get over to Korea?
Through Camp Stoneman onto the USS Pope troop ship, which was carrying mostly Air Force personnel, since I was being assigned to an Army unit that was attached to the Air Force. It was called SCARWAF, Special Category Army with the Air Force. Very little known outfit.
All right, now the unit you went to was already over there. Were you readily accepted into the unit?
Oh yes, very nicely, very well. As a matter of fact, I ran into some people that I had gone through basic training with and had gone to school with in Fort Belvoir when I got to the unit that I was in. So I wasn't a complete stranger to everybody, and that helped.
Now, what was the name of the unit?
The 811th Engineer Aviation Battalion.
Okay.
So you were assigned to an air base?
We were assigned to 2 air bases, actually. Seoul Air Base, just outside of Seoul on a little island in the Han River, and Kimpo Air Base, which was a major fighter base.
All right, as an aviation unit, Engineer Aviation Battalion, what did you do there?
Well, the Air Force at the time wasn't very old, and they didn't have their own civil engineering units like the Army Corps of Engineers. So the units that were already working with the Army Air Corps, the Army Air Corps, were carried over into the Air Force and just stayed with them. And the 811th was one of those. just for general upkeep and maintenance and construction of airfields and so forth.
So basically you were trained as a draftsman but didn't work as one?
That's right. I worked this one short time at Fort Drum before I transferred out of the 593rd, then and in Boston. But once I was overseas, there was no call for a draftsman. There was no need for any drafting.
How did you get along with the Air Force guys? I mean, being you had Army and Air Force together, were
No problems at all.
okay.
Very nice, very good relationship between the two.
Okay.
Did you have much contact with the Korean people at all?
Yes, as a matter of fact, our company had approximately 250 Korean civilians working with us. They did the heavy labor work.
Mm-hmm. What were your relations like with those people?
Amicable. We got along pretty well. They knew a little of English and we picked up a little of Korean, so we were able to communicate pretty well. And there was always at least one that could communicate with both sides, and we would work as an interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there were interpreters assigned to every company.
Okay. So basically, what were some of the specific things that you did?
All right, we repaved the runways at Seoul City Air Base and Kimpo Air Base. We actually ran everything from a quarrying operation right up through the asphalt plant and the actually laying of the asphalt on the runways at both air bases. And part of our unit worked with the Australian Air Force in building a big hangar at Kimpo Air Base. In fact, I have a picture of that.
Okay. Were there any blacks in your unit?
Yes.
Because the Army had just started to integrate at that time.
Yes, we had several blacks in the unit. But
Were there, what were race relations like there?
very well, very good.
Mhm.
Very good. They were hard workers. One I remember in particular was a heavy equipment operator, and he was good. He was a sharp operator.
Mhm.
Don't remember his name.
While you were there, do you recall when MacArthur was replaced? Do you recall any feelings about that at the time?
Well,
or-
he was replaced before I got there,
Oh, okay, was he? All right.
so I didn't have any. I was in, I believe I was in Boston at the time he was
Mhm.
replaced.
Okay, just before you went over then.
Before I went over.
Now, you mentioned on your forum that something unusual happened while you were in Boston. Eloping?
Oh! Yeah.
You forgot that, huh?
I forgot that. I was stationed at Boston, and my girlfriend was going to school in Philadelphia. And the job I had in Boston was just like a civilian job. It was 8 to 4, 5 days a week, so I had every weekend off. And one weekend I would come home. The other weekend I would go to Philadelphia and visit her. And one day I said, you know, if we get married, you could be drawing an allotment from the government. We were planning on being married in July anyway. And I said we could, you know, just not tell anybody and get married again in July as if we never did it. Well, that worked fine until I got my orders to go overseas. Then we had to tell people.
Okay. Do you remember any unusual things you did, or?
Not really. My 2 years was a regular routine.
Now, what kind of, did you live in barracks or Quonset huts or?
I lived in tents in Korea.
Tents?
When I was in Boston, I lived at the YMCA in Cambridge. There were no barracks or living facilities at all there. There's a cafeteria on the base, but there were no living quarters, so I did live in the YMCA for several months.
Now in Korea, were you there during the winter?
The beginning of the winter. I left there the week before Christmas in 1952.
So your tents, how were they heated, with stoves?
Stove, yeah. I believe they were heated with oil, if I remember correctly. Diesel fuel, probably. And there was one person assigned to 2 or 3 tents to keep them going all the time. And that was his job. That's all he did.
Did you ever, what kind of food did you eat while you were there? Did you ever have much of the Korean food? Or?
No, we didn't have any of the Korean food. Being in the Air Force and being in the Corps of Engineers, we ate very well. We never even had to eat like C rations or K rations. The only time we did that is when I came back home. But the food was very good, as I remember.
Did you get to see any USO shows or any type of entertainment?
Yes, one. See, I was only there about 6 months, and I saw one, and the only person I can remember that was in that show was Frances Langford, the singer. I'm sure there were other people, but I don't remember who they were.
Okay.
All right, when did you return back to the States then?
I left Korea the week before Christmas, spent Christmas in Japan, and boarded the USS Sultan for the trip home to San Francisco. Arrived home, actually home, I believe it was the 8th of January, after a rough trip across the ocean. We ran into a storm about halfway across. And an interesting point about our trip, if you remember, Eisenhower had just been elected president.
Oh, yes.
And they picked men from each unit, each combat unit in Korea, to act as his honor guard. And they were on that ship with us.
Wow.
They and also 90 general prisoners coming home for either life in prison or being executed
They were still executing prisoners back then?
for murder and rape.
Okay.
Now where were these men kept?
In a hold down in front of the ship, and they'd be marched through twice, 2-3 times a day for meals, and that's the only time we ever saw them, except once a day they would be up on deck for exercise and fresh air.
Were they kept in chains or
No,
manacles? Or?
no, they didn't have any place to go. So
Yeah. All right, when were you discharged?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I was supposed to have been discharged on the 16th of January, and I actually wasn't discharged until the 26th of February, because somewhere in the process, all my records got lost. And when I reported into Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania for discharge, I reported in. I was carrying my shot record and my pay record, and I reported in, and the officer that I reported into said, "We don't have any record of you." So, what do I do now? He said, "Well, the best thing I can do is write you an open-end pass and report back every once in a while. Maybe your records will finally catch up with you." Well, I went back 3 times before they decided that they could discharge me without the records. So I was actually 40 days over my 2-year commitment. And they never did find my records, by the way.
But they did pay you, I hope.
Oh yeah, I had my pay record.
Okay, did you ever make use of a GI Bill or any GI benefits at all?
Yes, for a short time I went to college at, well, it was Hudson Valley Technical Institute. Now it's Hudson Valley Community College. But I didn't finish because I had a family, and my occupation, I was working for General Electric, and I was working second shift, 4 to 12, and go to school days, and then that's the time when General Electric work started getting really bad, and I had a choice of either getting laid off completely or going on days, which is a strange thing. Usually you end up on nights if you... But that meant that I couldn't go to school anymore, so I never finished that.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yes, I belong to the American Legion in Ballston Spa. I'm a life member of the VFW in Glens Falls, Post 2475. And I'm also very active. In fact, I'm the commander of the chapter of the Korean War Veterans Association that meets in Glens Falls. It's known as the Adirondack Chapter number 60. I've been the commander there 3 years now, and I was in, I think, 3 years once before.
Did you ever stay in contact with anyone that was in service with you?
Just a couple of people. I've looked for several. Of course, we all got separated. We come home separately. And I did look for a couple of people and never found them. But there were two that I did find. In fact, in the pictures that we've got, I've got a picture of one of the fellows that I went to school with and took basic training with. And 40 years later, I visited him over in Massachusetts. And also, I knew of one of the fellows ran a big fruit and vegetable organization down in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So when I was coming through there one time, coming back from Philadelphia, long after we were married, of course, we stopped and looked him up. And they're really the only two that I've ever been able to find.
How do you think your time in service had an effect or perhaps changed your life?
Oh, I think that my time in service gave me a lot more self-confidence than I had before. I was put into a position of responsibility for unknown reasons, and I think that helped me a lot in the future. It was a good experience.
Okay. Could you hold these up and tell us where and when that was taken?
All right, this was taken approximately November of '52. It's a picture of myself outside of the tent that we lived in. As you can see, I'm carrying a .45, which is the only weapon I carried in Korea.
Okay. All right.
That was when I was actually night supervisor of the organization of the company. And this, when we were working on this, kind of goes along with this one. We were building a hangar for the Royal Australian Air Force at Kimpo Air Base, and they had with them a unit of the Australian Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army would twice a day serve us hot tea. And it was just tea, there was nothing in it. And that's a picture of me drinking some of my tea.
Okay.
Okay, you had other photographs you wanted to show us?
I've got a whole book full of photographs. This is three of the fellows. The fellow on the extreme right is one of the ones that I tried to look for and never could find. He was a very good friend of mine. He was from St. Albans, and I never could track him down after we came home. And the fellow on the left is the one that I mentioned that I found down in New Jersey.
And is that you in the center?
No, that's a person named Don Skipper. He was from somewhere out in Wisconsin or somewhere out in that area. I lost all track of him.
Okay.
This was taken on the site of the hangar construction for the Royal Australian Air Force.
Okay.
Were there any others you wanted to show us, or, it's up to you if...
No, there's not really anything that's interesting. There's a picture of one of the rock crushers that we used to crush the rock for the runway asphalt. And I've got several pictures of Seoul, and well, this one might be of interest. I made sure I took a picture of the airplane that I flew out on.
Okay.
And somewhere in that booklet I've got there's a picture of the Constellation aircraft that that Eisenhower came over on. He landed at Seoul Air Base while I was there.
Mhm.
He had promised that he would go to Korea if he
Yes,
was
right.
selected, and he did, and he landed where we were.
How did you feel about Eisenhower and him doing that?
We felt great about it.
Mhm.
We felt that he kept a promise, and that he probably was sincere about trying to end the war.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, one of the interesting things that probably wasn't the nicest thing to do, it got cold. It got very cold after November in Korea, and the Koreans weren't particularly dressed for cold. And as I said, we had quite a few of them working for the organization. And they had a habit of at night taking a 50-gallon drum, putting a little diesel fuel in it, having a fire and getting warm, and they wouldn't do their work. So a couple of nights I decided I'm going to get them back to work. I took a couple of 45 caliber shells and threw them in the fire. Well, it took a while before it burned down, and they finally exploded, and the Koreans went back to work. But after that, when I'd come around and they'd be there, I'd just pick up a couple of stones without them seeing it, throw it in, and they'd figure it was 45 shells, and they'd run back to work. It wasn't the nicest thing to do, but it worked.
All right, thank you.